You are listening to Any Given Sunday, a part of the Dead End Podcast Network. Please subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, and all other podcasting services. Please make sure you check out Dead End Hip Hop, Dead End Sports, Dead End Gaming, Is the Mic Still On, Chris Platt's Strictly Hip Hop and Hoops Talk, and a host of other shows on our podcast network. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. For Sunday, March 10th, 2019, this is Any Given Sunday, and I'm your host, Manny Brown. What's up, everyone? Hopefully you guys are enjoying your weekend. This is the second of two episodes that have dropped this weekend. The first episode featuring Daryl Slater was posted on Friday, so hopefully you guys have had a chance to listen to that. If you haven't done so, please check it out. I think it was a really dope show, getting a lot of positive feedback from that show. Daryl Slater provided some good insight on the Jets and, you know, the NFL draft and some other things. So if you haven't done so already, go check it out. You guys know where to find it. iTunes, SoundCloud, everywhere, we're everywhere. My guest this week is someone I said on the episode on Friday that has been someone I've been trying to get on the show for a while. It's just we haven't been able to get our schedules lined up, but we finally got back in contact this week, and we were able to set something up, and I'm very excited and happy to have him on the show. Someone that I wanted to talk to for a while. I think he's one of the best reporters on the Lakers. He's very connected, knows the team front and back, and is someone that I think is going to give us some good insight, not just on the Lakers, but on him, on himself, his career, what he's been doing, and how he got started and all that good stuff. So hopefully you guys get to enjoy that. My guest today is Harrison Faigen. He is the longtime Lakers NBA reporter for SB Nation's Silver Screen and Roll. He's also the editor-in-chief of that site. He also co-hosts the Laker Nation podcast along with his co-host Anthony Irwin, which you can find anywhere where podcasts are free. I've been really wanting to have this guy on for a while. We've been trying to get him on the show really since October, but just, you know, he's a very busy man, as you can imagine. So we finally got a gap in his schedule, and we were finally able to get him on the show. So I'm very excited to have him on here today. Harrison, welcome to Any Given Sunday. How are you, man?
Actually, normally on a weekend morning, I'd say not a whole lot, but because normally like those are kind of our relaxed days in terms of posting. But right. Actually, a lot is going on this morning with the Lonzo and Ingram injury news and all that stuff. So it's been a busy morning. How are you?
I'm good, man. Like we talked offline, I spent most of my morning dealing with toddlers fighting over toys and dolls and things and whatnot. So I don't know which one's harder, but I guess we'll have to agree that it's a wash, right?
Yeah, I think it's probably even in terms of who had the harder morning.
Absolutely. And for those of you that by the time you guys will listen to this, you guys will know that both Lonzo and Brandon are both out for the season. If you want to just kind of elaborate a little bit further on the Ingram situation, because I think that one's a little bit more serious than the Lonzo. I think most people expected Lonzo to, especially after the Lakers kind of, played themselves out of playoff contention. I think most people expected that Lonzo at some point was going to be shut down. But I think the Brandon Ingram thing is a little bit of a concern for Laker Nation. So
just in case it goes the other way, the Lonzo thing isn't official yet. As when we're recording this, it was Chris Haynes reported that like he's expected to be declared out for the season, which kind of like it jives with what Luke was saying at practice yesterday about how like he kind of implied that there was a possibility that Lonzo would be done because he said that he wasn't even close to returning to full practicing, and they would still want him to do that for like a week before he returned to games full time. So like I think even without sourcing, it's probably a fair guess that Lonzo is probably not going to be back this season, but I just wanted to note that could be wrong before. But Ingram did declare out for the season with something called DVT, which is deep venous thrombosis. I think it's thrombosis, but basically blood clots. And that's what was causing his shoulder issue. Luke had said earlier this week that Ingram was having a hard time lifting his shoulder or his arm above his head without pain, which to me, like that sounded pretty serious.
Yeah.
Like I assumed it was probably muscular hearing that, like, especially given like how long his arms are and like how much like jumping and running and all that stuff he was doing, how much he was raising them up to finish and things like that. I figured it was probably some type of muscular thing, but this is actually potentially more serious. It's like it sounds like from everything that I've been able to gather over the last couple hours, it sounds like it's not that serious if it's just the first time that it happens. Like the expected treatment is, the Lakers haven't said this, but what most people expect the treatment to be is about 6 months on, or like a few months on blood thinners, which is generally how they treat the first occurrence of this. And during that time, you can't really be active and all of that stuff because, if you were to get cut, you have less clotting ability and things like that. So usually like in in serious cases when it's not caught early, it can potentially lead to a stroke or a heart attack. But like by all indications are that this is not a case like that because they caught this pretty early and they'll probably be able to just get it taken care of. So, obviously that's a lot bigger than basketball, but kind of one of the things that I was trying to note as we were covering this was like, Ingram wants this as bad as anyone, and so it makes it a little sadder that no matter how serious it is, that this happens while he was in the middle of the best basketball of his career, because he had finally figured it out.
Yeah.
And to see him go down like this, like given how hard he is on himself, how much he pushes himself, I just like, even as a journalist who like tries to be objective about everything, it's hard to not feel some level of human empathy for a guy like that, going through like a potentially serious health issue while he had just kind of attained everything that he wanted.
It's really sad when you think about it, because Brandon's been through a lot in the last couple years, and he's a guy that I think most Laker fans see the potential, but have always been like, we need to see more. We need to finally see it blossom. And we finally started to see it blossom really in the last, 5 to 10 games. And he just really was playing at a level. He was confident. You could just tell on the court that he knew. And that's when when a guy figures it out, when he just knows like, my spots on the floor where I can shoot, where my best spots where I can take over. I know my role in the offense. I'm confident. I know I can do my thing. That's when a guy is starting to figure it out. And of course, right when he figures it out, he has a serious injury. So it's frustrating. It's definitely frustrating.
That's just how things go for the Lakers over the past couple of years. It's like Laker fans are not allowed to have anything. Lakers fans and their players are not allowed to have anything nice. Something has to go wrong as soon as things are going right. That's just in the, I think 5 or 6 years I've covered the team now, that's been like the cardinal rule.
Yeah, well, as a fan watching this team for the last 5 years, I'll definitely say it's been a cardinal rule. Before we kind of get into the season and the disaster and LeBron and everything all the storylines, a lot of people that will listen to this probably don't know who you are or probably, don't follow the Lakers that closely. So I always like to give my guests a chance to kind of introduce themselves to the audience and just kind of give a little bit of their bio and their background. So, how did Harrison Faigen come to be Harrison Faigen covering the Lakers?
So Harrison Faigen came to be Harrison Faigen, editor-in-chief of Silver Screen and Roll, which is SB Nation's Lakers coverage site, through a lot of years of, blogging for not that much money or, acclaim or, attention paid to it, because I started covering this team, and I use the term covering loosely. I was like a volunteer at this blog doing like link aggregation. So it was like, I was like basically compiling like a newsletter before a newsletter, essentially. It was like the day's headline for our site's readers to catch up on. And I started doing that the day after Dwight Howard left. So I've never covered a playoff Lakers team. I've never covered a good Lakers team. I am beginning to think that I am the problem. So I started out doing that. I wasn't really writing a whole lot. And eventually, I started to go back to school because I'd been out of school for a while. And I started to go back to school, and I told my editor at the time that I was hoping that if she couldn't pay me, then I probably wasn't going to be able to continue to do it because I was going to have to look for work or something like that.
Right.
And she was nice enough to not laugh at me for asking for money for, that small little literally it probably took me an hour a day. I thought that was what writers did. I was very naive to how all of this worked. And she was nice enough to not laugh at me and just suggested that maybe I write a little bit. And then maybe they could find some kind of stipend in the budget for me. And so I did. I started writing a little bit, and then I started writing more and more and more. And then eventually I got to the point where I was one of the most prolific writers at the site. And, I think I was eventually kind of second in charge at the site under my boss at the time, Drew Garrison. And, so I did that for a while. I started being a credentialed journalist covering the team a little bit in 2015. It was right after D'Angelo Russell was drafted, was my first time being credentialed. And then I started covering the team on nearly a full-time basis the next year. And so for that time, I've been going to about half their home games and a lot of their practices and things like that. And I left Silver Screen and Roll for about a year to go to Lakers Nation. And then I came back to Silver Screen and Roll. So yeah, that's been my journey through my very brief journey through journalism so far.
Awesome. Did you ever think that because I know you talked about the writing, did you ever think that you'd get this far with the writing part? Because I know I would assume that wasn't probably the first passion when you got involved. So did you ever think that the writing thing would matriculate and develop and blossom the way that it did?
No, you're absolutely right. I never dreamed that this would be my career path in kind of my wildest dreams. Like when I first started out, I just wanted to be involved with something. I thought the site was really cool. I really enjoyed the voice that it had and how they tried to kind of like add opinion to their reports of like, okay, here's this thing that is happening. What does this actually mean? I appreciated the analysis and things like that, and it was something that I wanted to contribute to. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at that point. I was out of school. I was studying to be a special education teacher. And so I ended up taking a very, very different career path than I ended up anticipating. I was just a fan of the team growing up, and the fandom has faded mostly now that I cover them on a day. It's like work. But, I'm the passion that where the fandom was has been replaced with like a passion for writing really cool stories and like, feeling a responsibility to this Lakers audience to try and tell them the most interesting stories that we can and try and keep them the most informed that we can on everything that's going on with this team, because that's what drew me to the site in the first place as a fan.
Interesting. You brought something up that I've always kind of found interesting with writers and columnists and people that cover teams and sports in general. A lot of them obviously are at one point or another were a fan of the game. I'm assuming, obviously a lot of them, you don't just choose to become a writer and cover sports if you're not a fan of sports, obviously. But,
I would say probably not. That is true for 99% of people. There's the occasional person that just kind of gets thrown into it and ends up being really good at it.
Right. No, I get it. But for the majority, obviously they have some affection for the sport, obviously.
Yeah.
I've always kind of wondered, how hard is it to separate the fandom? Because obviously you grew up a Laker fan and obviously as an adult, you still have some affinity for the Lakers, obviously. How do you separate, the fan and Harrison and, Harrison, the journalist? Cause, it's easy for me as a podcaster. I consider myself a broadcaster. So I'm not a columnist. I'm not involved. So I can let my fandom be my fandom. And, when I'm frustrated, I can show that. With you, it's a little bit different. You kind of have to have that journalistic professionalism when you're covering the team. But how do you balance that being a fan? And I know you said it's faded a little bit since you started covering it, but how do you balance that dual role of being kind of a fan but a broadcaster first?
So it's not as hard anymore. It was really hard when I first started. My first summer league, being credentialed for it, I remember, I got a bunch of glares on press row because, Larry Nance Jr., I don't know if you remember from that summer league, but that was the one, it was the game against the Sixers where Larry Nance Jr. kind of had.
Yeah. No, I remember.
And like people didn't really know what to think of him at that point. Like he had been the one draft pick where people were like, okay, wait, Larry Nance, like who? And
me included.
Yeah. And there was one moment in that game he blocked, I think it was Jahlil Okafor, but I'm not 100% sure. He blocked one of the big men on the Sixers, and he blocked him so hard that you could hear the thud like throughout the entire arena. And I jumped up and screamed. And like I took a bunch of like nasty glares on press row for that because it was the most crowded game of like maybe the entire summer league that year. And I wasn't there with like the decorum quite yet. And my boss, Drew, he just kind of laughed at me and like told me, he's like, hey, like you got to try and keep that under wraps. Like while you're here, it's fine if you're a fan. But while you're here, you got to try and keep that under wraps. And so that, like after that, I was pretty good. Like there's still occasionally times where I catch myself just as like a fan of the game when somebody gets dunked on really hard. You almost can't help but yell ooh or something like that. But as far as balancing the fandom part of it, it's not as hard anymore because once I was kind of on the beat for a year or two, you start to, it removes a big part of the fandom aspect of it. At least for me, it did, because you're around these guys so much, they cease to be superheroes anymore. Like they're just kind of like they aren't your coworkers because you're not on the same quote unquote side. Like you're covering them, you aren't working with them, but you're working around them a lot, and you realize that they're just, like they're human beings. And like I don't want to talk down to people and make it seem like other people are worshiping these guys because they're not. Like they know they're human beings and things like that. But it's a little different when you're around them and you get to know them as people versus just like these athletes and stuff. So, and then also just like the journalism aspect of it, like you start coming into a little bit of the impartiality, and eventually for me that kind of took over. Like, I don't really root for wins or losses anymore. I root for whatever is best for whatever I'm writing about at that time, basically. And so there have been times where, you know, I've been a little bit annoyed at the team coming back in a game because I had already started writing the recap as if they lost, because you know, you're on deadline, you have to start writing,
right.
And so you have to like shift your whole thing at the end. And there have been similar times where they're winning and I've been annoyed because they gave up the lead and ended up losing. And so, like, that's about as close as it gets for me anymore. But I'm still a really big fan of basketball. I still really enjoy basketball. I'm probably, if I'm being honest, I'm probably a little bit, I'm hopeful that the Lakers will get good again, if nothing else than for my own, like, professional benefit, because it's been better for me to cover a relevant team this year. And I'm hoping that eventually the basketball that I can watch will stop becoming so, like, eye-gougingly bad as it has been over the last couple weeks, and how it seems to always devolve over this time that I've covered the team. But like, balancing the fan part isn't that much of a struggle anymore, just because I don't really find myself rooting for it. Like, there are certain guys that, you know, like I'll root for just because I like them personally and I'm hoping they do well, or I think they've been working really hard. Like the Ingram thing, like as a person, I can't claim to know him tremendously well, but from covering him over the last 3 years, it's just really obvious that he's a guy who wants this as bad as anyone. And so, like, for me, I am hoping that he comes back, has no further complications from this, and is able to go out there and kill it, because I think he's a good dude that, like, has, like, very genuine intentions with basketball. But, you know, but like I said, like, the fandom part of it for me is mostly dead. I don't have to, like, stifle cheers or anything on press row anymore. That's a little bit different for my colleague, Pete Zayas of Laker Film Room. He still struggles, and sometimes when we sit next to each other at games, it's funny to watch his reactions to various things.
And how hard is that? You know, like I've heard that story before about, you know, guys being in press row and, you know, having a story already drafted and something crazy happens, a comeback or, you know, or, you know, or in the other sense, a comeback from both, you know, one way or another, you know, the team that you're covering comes back or the other team comes back. So you already have like material written and you have to kind of scrap it in mid form. How hard is that? You know, for me, like, I like writing, but I'm someone that has to like extremely focus on writing. So like everything has to be great. Everything has to line up perfectly for me to just have that story and have that flow. You guys, in a drop of a dime, have to kind of just come up with something and, you know, and sometimes almost deviate in mid process. So how hard of a skill is that? How do you guys, how did you struggle with that at first, or how did you kind of master that skill as you went along?
Oh, I definitely would not say that I've mastered it. Recaps are still the hardest thing to do for me and for I think almost anyone. Like, they're easy in the sense that, you know, you have a guaranteed story. You know, either way, you're going to have a post out of it at the end. Like, you're going to have something done. So, like, it's easy in the sense that there's a game and it will be over at some point and you will have a story. And so, like, it's an easy story idea to come up with and execute. But the actual part of doing it depends on how the game is going. Like, a blowout recap is one of the easiest posts that you can do. Like, I've had, it actually wasn't the Lakers, but I was covering, I remember I was covering Cal State Fullerton last year in their season opener on the road against USC. And I just kind of wanted to go cover a game at USC. I thought it would be cool. And so I ended up going on the road and covering that game and making the hour commute or whatever. And I remember they were getting blown out so badly. My recap of that game was done by halftime. And I just had to plug in final stats, like, at the end of it once they went live. But that was an easy one to knock out and get done, because, like, if they're a blowout, you have plenty of time to write. Like, the outcome's not that in doubt. The ones that are the toughest to write aren't even the ones where a team makes a late comeback and wins, be it where you have to scrap your entire prior recap where they were getting blown out. The hardest ones are the ones that are close down to the wire, because there's no easy narrative there. Like, at least in a comeback, you have they had this lead, but they ended up blowing it, and, like, here's how it happened type thing. Or, like, here's how the Lakers mounted their furious comeback to come back. The hardest ones are the ones where it's back and forth the entire game, where, like, the entire game they're, like, within 4 to 6 points of each other. Those are hard to write because it's hard to find an angle before the buzzer's over, because everything's in doubt, especially if it goes down to, like, a game winner or something. So, you know, as a fan, those were, like, my favorite games to watch, but as a writer, those are, like, that's, like, the thing, at least for me personally, that's the thing you almost hate to see. At least when you're writing the recap. If I'm there and I'm not writing the recap, I'm rooting for a close, fun game, because, you know, it'll be more enjoyable to watch and there will be more relevant things to ask afterwards. But if I'm writing the recap, I'm rooting for a blowout all the way.
That's interesting. It's really, really interesting. So I've talked to other writers before, and a lot of them are, it's interesting because a lot of them like covering the players, and a lot of them like covering the coaches, and some don't like covering the players as much as covering the coaches, and vice versa. So where do you kind of stand? Do you like covering the coaches? Do you find it insightful to kind of get the intricacies of the game from the coaching perspective or from the player perspective?
I think that you have to have a balance of both. We obviously get to talk to the coaches a lot more because they have, or at least the head coach, because like in the NBA, the coach has like media mandate or mandated media availability on game days 3 times a day, at shoot around, before the game, and then after the game. So like, and then at practice, the coach talks every single practice, and whereas like the players vary before, and then sometimes you can talk to guys before games, but a lot of the time they're they're off in the players lounge, like getting work done, or like they're preparing for the game, or they're out there shooting or whatever. So like you get to talk to the players less, just almost by virtue of how it goes. And so I do think that sometimes that structure is why you see a lot of the times like media members, especially on like the national level, tend to side with coaches on things, like when they are opinionating, which doesn't always happen, but it's because they're around them a lot more and they hear that viewpoint a lot more. I think for me, the most important thing, the most important responsibility that we have is like when people are saying something, like you need to see how much you can back that up, like because like coaches can give coach speak or whatever, but you have to be able to contextualize like what they're saying using numbers. Like if they're talking about how like, I think that we've been playing faster the last couple games, but the team's pace hasn't changed at all, then like that's something that you have to kind of be ready for to follow up on, or it's something that you have to note in your thing so that you aren't like letting them misinform people through your platform. And it's not like, I don't want to make it sound like they always do it intentionally, but
no, I get it.
I think one of the most important things that you can do is make sure that you're separating like what coach speak is from what like a coach speak. And coach speak, when I say that, I just mean like saying the right thing, quote unquote. So like players do it too. There's just kind of like the blasé cliche quotes that you sometimes get. So like trying to probe for deeper stuff than that is interesting, and trying to just make sure that like you're showing your audience whether or not kind of they're being like they're correct in their viewpoints a little bit.
And for you, have you noticed, how has it been dealing with other writers, because I get the sense that the journalist community is very kind of cliquish in a lot of ways. And you getting your background from kind of the new medium, obviously vlogging and writing on an internet site, as opposed to your kind of pen and pad or voice recorder guy who covered the team for 20, 30 years on on a local newspaper. So do you find it that there's almost like I'm not trying to figure out how to ask this, kind of almost like a rivalry or kind of between the old timers and the new timers, the new kids on the block, the vloggers, the internet site guys, as opposed to kind of your traditional journalists? Do you find it there, like, in your beginning, when you first started out, did you find it a little challenging kind of working with those guys, or has it always been kind of a smooth transition between the two?
I'm actually pretty lucky. I don't know if I'm just lucky, but I have not found the blog, like in my personal interactions with people, I have not found the blogger traditional media like divide, quote unquote, to be that vast. And I don't know if it's just because I came into it while I was pretty young and I was still like a traditional journalism student, so like maybe they would have reacted differently to me if I was a guy that was like wearing a Kobe jersey underneath my dress shirt or something, right, like showing up to the games. So I don't know if that would. I think that that's the type of thing that I tend to notice it more on Twitter. You see it from some journalists get upset with the way that they get aggregated, and I think sometimes that's genuine because I think sometimes there are I'm not going to name names of sites or whatever, but I think sometimes there are blogs that do aggregate things fairly out of context. And so like if I was and because it's happened to me before where people have taken, and it's usually like no name blogs or whatever, but people have taken like some speculation that I gave that was phrased pretty clearly as speculation and run with it as report. Like I think there was one time I wrote an article about like 5 guys the Lakers should target at the trade deadline or something like that. And somebody wrote, like some little blog wrote it up as like I was reporting that the Lakers were interested in those players. And so like when clearly like I had said like here are some trades we think the Lakers should make and stuff like that. Like, so I understand getting upset with things like that. I do think that sometimes it is on the journalists to be a little bit more careful in their wording of things, and like don't phrase something as like definitive or fact if you don't want it to get aggregated as definitive or fact. Like say what you have backed up, but don't say more than that, or make it more clear that you're just giving your opinion or whatever. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of anger at like shaking fists at the aggregators about like, oh, like you took this thing that I said and phrased it exactly like I did in this article, but now it sounds worse because that wasn't exactly the way that I said it.
Right.
And so, you know, I think sometimes it's a little bit on both sides, but overall, like my personal interaction, like I have not found it to be like as cliquish as I think it's sometimes made out to be online. Like I have pretty good, I'm pretty friendly with most of the like people that are covering the team on a day-to-day basis for like traditional media sites, and as well as with like the bloggers that cover the team. So I don't know if that's just a me thing, but my personal experience has mostly been pretty good with that.
That's awesome. That's really good to hear. Because you do hear that a lot. You do hear that it's kind of a little bit of a divide. Obviously, it doesn't always apply to every single person, obviously.
I think it used to be more like early on when there was like less of an understanding that there was enough room for both.
Right.
And I think, because that's the sense that I've gotten from talking to people that have been around this longer. I think it used to be worse. I think now you mostly only see like very, very old school people acting that way.
And how do you brought up the aggregation of comments and things of that nature, things that you may be speculating, and then people take and run with it and make it, as it's fact or something that you're reporting as it to be true. How do you deal with that as a writer? You said that that's happened to you. How do you deal with it, and how do you try to manage that aspect of things? Because you know what's going to happen. Even as many times as you try to word it correctly, you know what's going to happen. Somebody's going to take something and run with it. It's just the nature of the beast. So how do you prepare for that? How do you deal with it? Or is it something that you just chalk it up to just that's the game?
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of what happens. Like, the few times that it's happened to me, it's been such a small blog that, like, I would be giving them more publicity just by sharing it and saying this is incorrect than by just not doing anything at all. And so, like, for me, I've never really felt like I needed to completely address it because it's never gotten to the level where, like, it's spun out of control, where it's, like, a major national, like, outlet aggregating something that I said out of context, which, to be fair, I think happens very rarely that people get it, like, super wrong. I think sometimes the bigger issue is that journalists, like, they say something and then they're like, it's out of your mouth, you can't edit it.
Right.
And then, like, it gets aggregated because they said, like, I talked to someone that was saying this. And so somebody's like, someone with the Lakers is saying that, so-and-so is like, whatever. And so, like, and they didn't phrase it exactly like that, but that's essentially what they said. And then they're like, oh, well, wait, I didn't actually want that out there. So now your aggregation is bad. It's like, well, no, you said it and you reported this. So, that's what it is. And so I think that almost, to me, that happens more than bloggers, like, taking things out of context. Although there are just Twitter accounts like NBA Legion and things like that. Like, some of the, like,
I know.
Seal, like, whatever account, like, theft accounts, essentially, or, like, the ones that will be, like Chris Haynes will say something about, like, what he thinks of how LeBron has been playing, and, like, they'll aggregate it as, like, he's reporting that LeBron James is whatever. And, so they're like fake accounts or accounts that take things out of context a lot. But for the most part, I think that kind of stuff is, like, mostly overblown.
He's trying to give y'all some games, everybody. He's trying to give y'all the keys to the game. Don't believe some of these fake sites, please.
Yeah, there are some fake ones out there, like, that occasionally pop up in my Google alerts. Like, there's I forget the name of it now, but there's one that aggregated something that one of my writers at my site said the other day that was like, I forget what he was even talking about, but there are just ones that will just take something, you speculating on something as a report just because you wrote it. And, like, you have to have media literacy in reading it. Like, if somebody isn't saying, like, they aren't either stating it as fact or they aren't stating it as, like, according to a source or according to so-and-so, then they probably aren't saying that as a fact.
Right. So you just as a fan have to just be smart and understand that, there's a difference between reporting and speculating, obviously. And a lot of times you're putting your opinion out there. Like you could just say, hey, this is my opinion. I think that that doesn't mean that that's what it is. It's just that you're saying that you think, you know what I mean? So I get it.
I think media literacy should honestly be taught in high schools, but that's like a whole tangent for a different day. I do feel like that's something that is very poor overall in this country. And like that, and this isn't just a sports thing. This is an overall thing. And I think that it would help people to understand the process that goes into journalism so that they're less likely to cry out fake news or, just because something is an anonymous report doesn't mean that they made it up. I think there's that idea out there sometimes. I mean, I'm not going to say that never happens because we've seen throughout history it has happened before, but I think the amount of times that it happens is vastly outweighed by the amount of times that it's just accurate information.
Well, listen, Harrison, I am a professional tangent giver. So you talking about the failures of education in our country is another podcast episode for another day. Trust me. What's been your favorite moment covering this team? What's been the moment that kind of stands out for you the most as like, man, I remember that moment. That's a special moment.
Overall?
Yes, just overall.
Overall, that's I haven't thought a whole lot about that recently. Honestly, it's either
it doesn't have to be a moment. It could be a game, performance, anything.
I think my two favorite moments that I've ever covered are probably not ones that people will necessarily expect, but it was 2 years ago now, I think, that David Nwaba got called up.
Yeah.
And I was actually I had written a feature about kind of a smaller feature about how he had kind of broken out for the South Bay or the Defenders at the time. The Los Angeles Defenders was the Lakers D-League team at the time, and they're now the South Bay Lakers. But he had been basically a training camp, essentially a walk-on, a guy that they had signed. He didn't get drafted even in G League draft, and so he had been a guy that they signed. He beat out people for a roster spot in training camp, and then he was impressing everybody around there. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about him. I wrote a short thing on him and how great he had played in the G League or the D League so far. And then when he got called up by the Lakers, I did not expect it. And then to see him play so well down the stretch of that season that he ended up getting a real NBA contract about it, just as somebody who got to know him a little bit, covering him in the D League and then talking to him in NBA locker rooms. I remember his first game, he was he was blown away by just the whole process of it, how they they gave the players free food before every game, and to how many media members were in the locker room. I remember he asked me he's is this always like this? And it was he's just a really, really nice guy too, and so I was really happy to see him break out. The other one was Andre Ingram when he kind of exploded last year. He was a guy that I got to know really well in the D League. My first year covering it, he was somebody that I could always if I was working on something, I could always go to him for clarification or to talk about someone on the team or to just help me either inform my analysis or give me some just kind of make sure that I was on the right track with things or whatever. And he was just again another commonality, a really, really nice guy. And so I was happy to see him break out like he did for the Lakers last year. And I was hoping that he would get a look somewhere. And it's not too late. The G League is still playing. The Lakers even still have an open roster spot, so it's not too late for him. But I'm hoping to see him get a shot at some point somewhere again.
And how hard is it to cover the team? Because obviously this year not included, obviously, but because we kind of came in with some expectations this year. But how hard is it to come into a season knowing that you just have no chance of being a successful team? So drumming up stories, drumming up interest. Because part of this is also an entertainment aspect of it too. I mean, covering a team that's just completely horrible. It's an entertainment business, obviously. So from your perspective, how hard is it to cover a team? I know I have a couple friends that are baseball writers. And, they have 162 games to cover.
Yeah, I would say it's the hardest job in sports media,
absolutely.
I think by far is baseball beat reporter. That's tough.
That's tough.
I don't know how they do that.
Yeah. But you have 82 games and if the Lakers have not been great for the last 5 or 6 years. How hard is it to even yourself? I mean, you're human, you got to come to the arena every night and oh God, we got blown out again, especially those lean years. How hard is that for you as a writer in your time, how hard have you found that to be? That aspect of the job.
Actually, to be honest, I think this is different from a lot of people because I think a lot of people, and like myself included ultimately, because I know it's better for me personally to cover a relevant team. At the same time, when they were bad, the access was a little better just because they were less overflowing with media. Like, this isn't a criticism of the Lakers. This is just like if they're having to credential people for a LeBron James team versus like a lottery team, like you're just on a lottery team, you're going to get more access just because like there's going to be less of a horde of media to compete with, to like talk to people and all of that stuff. And so like for me, the games obviously were not great. And so like you don't get to write a lot of really interesting game stories because it's often like, oh, well, the Lakers lost again. And so, you know, that aspect of it was not the easiest. But like, as far as getting stories, like I always just tried to find like weird, interesting stories that I thought I was like, okay, I'm interested in this. I think other people would be too. And just try and find like things to inform people about, like either how a guy's developing, you know, over the course of the season, how, you know, like what kind of rituals the team's bench has used to bond while they're like playing like one of the best benches in the league, that Lou Williams, Larry Nance Jr., Tarek Black, Brandon Ingram, and I'm blanking on who the last member of that bench was that a couple of years ago, but I think it was Clarkson. They were really, really good. And so like writing about stuff like that, like little successes within the overall failure is like one angle, and doing stuff like, you know, like finding those stories on David Nwaba and Andre Ingram was, you know, stuff that I'm still to this day like really proud of. And then just like, you know, just trying to find interesting, weird, quirky stories was basically like how I tried to go about it. I was like, okay, I'm not going to treat this team as if they're like, this is probably going to sound harsh, but like as if they're a real NBA basketball team. Right. Like, I'm not going to treat them like, okay, every win or loss is what matters to people, because it's not. It wasn't what mattered to our viewer. Like, our viewers wanted to know overall, like, okay, how is D'Angelo Russell developing so far? How is, you know, like Lonzo Ball doing, like throughout, like where has his trend line been going and stuff like that. So like, you know, like what's behind Kyle Kuzma's breakout as like this kind of unforeseen first team all rookie type guy. So like just trying to find little stories on the successes within the overall failure was how I tried to approach it. I hope that kind of answered the question.
No, it did. It did. And that's insightful because I mean, I've always wondered that aspect of the job, because I mean, it must be tough to just cover a team. I mean, I can't imagine covering a team that's a perennial loser. Like, I just can't imagine.
And it's weird to consider the Lakers that, because when I was a fan, like they were always good. They were good every single year. I think they've missed the playoffs now over these last like 5 years. I think more than they had in franchise history before that. And so it's been kind of crazy to cover the Lakers and see how the perception has shifted of their team.
Yeah, no, you're talking to a diehard fan. So it's definitely, you know, because even as a fan, you know, everybody assumes that, oh, well, you're a Laker fan. What do you really have to struggle with? You know, I'm like, yeah, the last couple of years have been rough. They've been rough. You're an editor now, and so you're kind of the head honcho of your site, you know, so you're the guy that is in a lot of ways, you know, putting your imprint on a lot of the guys that you're over. You know, you're basically the first line of defense in a lot of ways to the stories that they put out. And as an editor, is it hard to do your job? Because part of being an editor is also being a writer yourself. And do you struggle with, you know, trying to let guys be their own writers and voice their own voice, or and also being the job of an editor to, you know, kind of curate stuff, to kind of be that last line of defense to, you know, hey, maybe you should make that alteration, or maybe you should change that a little bit, or maybe you should, you know, word that differently, or I wouldn't use that example, or I wouldn't use that source there, or whatever. You know, do you find that hard? Because I as an editor, I would imagine that it's hard to kind of, to play that role and also be a writer yourself, and also think it's like a parent, you know, you're trying to be a parent to a teenager, but also try to remember like you're a teenager too. So it's like balancing that it's a balancing act in a lot of ways. Do you struggle with that at times?
So I'm actually really, really lucky in that I have like SB Nation was able to invest in this site to the level that I have like a tremendously talented and like are probably overqualified for their current role staff. Mm-hmm. And so I try to give them a lot of rope to kind of write their thoughts and pursue stories that are interesting to them and things like that, while also at the same time coming up with story ideas. Because one of the biggest ways that I see my role is like setting my writers up for success. So it's not just editing them, although that's part of it. Like part of it is, you know, the examples that you gave saying, hey, maybe this example doesn't really work here, or let's clean up this phrasing a little bit, or whatever. But a big part of it for me is like trying to find, like after games, a big part of what I do is I transcribe all these interviews and I divvy them up into various stories that people can claim. And so like I set them up with like, okay, here's your headline, here's the quotes that you need for this story. Now you just have to go write it. And so like sometimes they will, and then sometimes they will pitch me on certain angles that they want to write, or certain story, like comments that they thought were interesting that they'd like to write a story about. And so there's a give and take there. But like for me, the you know, it's not like parenting at all in the sense that, you know, I've done parenting editing, which is when you're the managing editor of a school newspaper, which I did last year at the Daily Titan, Cal State Fullerton's student paper. And like that was editing where like you're constantly having to like fix things and whatever, because people are just a lot less experienced. And this isn't to take shots at any individual person or whatever. It's just like that's how it was. And people needed to be taught a little bit more because it's a student learning environment. Here, like, yes, I'm trying to help my writers be better, but it's just different, like, because the level of talent is just higher because like these are people that are professionals and they're people that have worked in this field at other outlets and things like that. And so like I'm trying to help them be better every single day, but they're already pretty good to start with. And so it makes my job a lot easier on that front. So like I would say the biggest struggle is just like sometimes finding enough time to write for myself while also doing everything else that you know, is required to keep the site running and keep everyone else on track.
How do you like podcasting?
I do like podcasting. I miss doing it. Sometimes I miss doing it daily. Which is what I used to do when I was the co-host of Locked On Lakers. Now I co-host a podcast once a week called The Lake Show on Silver Screen and Roll's podcast network. So I do really like podcasting. I feel like it's a way to connect with listeners in a way that I can't really in my writing, and no one really can in their writing, because you're talking directly to people. It's like having a conversation with your friends. Right. And like I know that I feel that way when I'm listening to my favorite podcasts. And so, like, it's just a way to give deeper context to things and kind of talk about with people about, you know, what, like, why we think that a certain story is meaningful or all that stuff like that you just don't really get to do when you're writing. And so I do really enjoy podcasting.
And before we kind of transition over to the team, what's the best advice that you ever received? You know, it could have been, you know, as recently as this week. It could have been, you know, first starting out. What's the best advice that you've ever received in starting your career?
I think the best advice that I ever got, though, the advice that has stuck with me the most is from Matt Moore, who is now with the Action Network. He used to do CBS Sports and various other websites. But I remember he told me once that like the best thing that an aggregator should be doing is adding value to stories, so that you're not just taking someone else's report and just like basically ripping their headline and stealing their clicks for no reason. Right. You want to give people so like if you're not reporting information firsthand. Like you're not like, so for example, with the Lonzo thing that I wrote about earlier, like where Chris Haynes reported that he was likely done for the season. I'm not just going to take Chris Haynes' report and then just be like, all right, here's this Chris Haynes tweet and I'm done for the day. Like I want to give some deeper meaning beyond that stuff. Like, so I wrote about how the Lakers defense has completely cratered without Lonzo and used a bunch of metrics to show like how valuable he's been to the team defensively. And so it's like, I think the best advice that I've ever gotten is trying to find some angle that's deeper than just the information and tell people really, okay, what does this mean? And that's been how I've had the most success. And then just like there are certain things where like I wrote earlier this week about the Pelicans and Lakers leaks and how both of them are anonymously leaking that they weren't the ones leaking the Anthony Davis leaks. Like very, very leakception type stuff. And so I was just trying to contextualize like the Lakers leak that they felt like these other teams were like essentially being unfair and like being out to get them. And I was like, okay, well, like, duh. Like, these other teams aren't your friends. Like, they're trying to compete against you. Of course they're trying to take advantage of you and make you look bad in the media. That's how this goes. And so, like, I wrote about different ways that the Lakers could have played the media game, different reasons that other teams may not like them as much, and just tried to give our viewers, like, a deeper thing so that it's not just this outcry of, like, where they're just taking these reports as, like, oh, yes, it all is fake news, and the media and the other teams are really out to get us. It's like, no, okay, the Lakers have done some things. Like, the way that they've approached a lot of these superstars and trade sagas and stuff is why you see resentment for them from these other teams around the league, and why you saw the Pelicans try to blow up their locker room with, like, a smart bomb of leaks about, like, just being like, yeah, every single player. They offered every single player. And then they essentially did in the Dark Knight, when the Joker breaks the pool cue and throws it on the ground. That's what the Pelicans did through all of their leaks throughout that deadline. And it worked, and the Lakers got played. So, like, I understand that they're mad about that, but you also have to note that there are reasons for that. It's not just because, like, oh, like, count the rings. The Lakers have 16 banners. They're just jealous. It's like, no, it's the Lakers have gotten caught tampering. I hesitate to say twice because the tampering fine that Magic got on Giannis was the dumbest tampering fine in NBA history. But they've gotten caught tampering with Paul George, like, without a doubt. And, you know, like, there have been inferences that is what had happened with Anthony Davis, which are inferences that are going to happen whenever you have your star player sharing an agent with another star player who is seemingly trying to force his way to the Lakers. And so there are a lot of reasons for this stuff. So, like, just trying to find any way that I can, whether it's stats or whether it's, like, media literacy or whatever it is, to add value to a story beyond just, here's what this report says.
And if a young college kid, and I know you did some editing at Cal State Fullerton, but, you know, what's the best advice you could give somebody starting, you know, whether they want to transition to vlogging, to doing traditional media? What's the best advice that you in your career so far can give someone starting out?
Whatever you want to do a lot of it. Like, if you want to write a lot. If you want to, even if it's just on your own personal blog, like, just like, if you don't, like, I understand people saying that you shouldn't work for free. For me personally, I would not have reached the point that I've reached without writing for free. So I see both sides of that argument, although I do think that you should be trying to get paid for every single thing that you write, because if you're writing for free, like, you do on some level, you're devaluing what people do for money. But at the same time, I also, like, for a lot of people, that's their only way to get their foot in the door.
Absolutely.
And so, like, I see both sides of it. Like, I just don't think that you should do it forever. And like don't let people take advantage of you. If you start to feel like you're being taken advantage of, you shouldn't do that. Like, if you feel like they're just straight up just passing you over for money, then, like, you shouldn't work at that place anymore. But if it's a place with a decent platform that's giving you an opportunity to get published and get in front of people, that is an opportunity, but only to some degree. Like, on some level, you also need to know where to draw the line and start taking money to write. So, like, again, I see both sides of it, but if you want to write, if you want a podcast, if you want to be on camera and be a broadcaster, if you want to edit video, whatever you're doing, do a lot of it, because most likely you're not going to be good at it to start. You might be better than the average person when they start, but you're not going to be good. With every single person that, like look at any writer that you think is good, look at any podcaster, video producer, whatever, like, that you think is good, and go back to their earlier work. Like, if it's out there and it's published online, I guarantee you it's not as good as what they're doing now. And it's because, this is cliche, but practice makes perfect. I was a terrible writer when I started writing. Like, I was probably a better writer than, like, your average college student that wrote, like, essays for class and stuff, but I was not a good writer on the standard of, like, covering a team and being a credentialed writer. I would have been awful by that comparison. So I needed to write a lot to get to the level where I am now, where I am, like, you know, adequate at this. And so that's the best thing. That's the best advice that I give. Like, obviously, don't sacrifice your mental health. Don't overwork yourself. All that stuff. But you got to work hard. You have to write a lot. You have to podcast a lot. You have to do whatever it is that you want to do. Do a lot of it. And for me, I just tried to be as versatile as possible. I tried to get reps at podcasting, being on camera, writing, whatever it was, because I wanted whatever opportunity that I got next, social media, whatever. I wanted to be able to go and take that opportunity without being like, oh, well, I don't really have the skills for that.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. Definitely great advice. So, let's transition over to this team. I was trying to hold it off as much as possible because, God, the Lakers, where do we begin with this disaster? But,
to be honest, I am shocked if people are this interested in what I've had to say previously. So I do apologize for that.
Listen, I've been following you for a while. I've been following your work. I actually started listening to you on Locked On Lakers. So, if anybody's interested, I'm interested. So that's all that matters.
If you're interested, then that means that that's the angle that I've tried to take is if I'm interested in something, it probably means that other people are too. And I do think that people are, I think one of the mistakes that traditional media makes sometimes is trying to act like the context of how we get quotes doesn't matter, or painting these scenes of the environment that things happen in, or that people aren't interested in the behind the scenes of how things happen. I think that people are really interested, especially in our increasingly basketball coverage ravenous climate. People want to know the stuff that I was talking about with the Pelicans versus Lakers leaks. People don't just want that information. They want to know what that information likely means, and they want to read on okay, if this thing is leaking out, where is that likely coming from? And I try to not overly speculate on that stuff, but you can notice trend lines and things like that. And I do think that people are interested in that, and that is something that I've tried to give insight into in my work.
One more thing, you brought up something that I find interesting. How do you deal with the leaks? How do you deal with sources? Because I would imagine it's hard to kind of decipher what's BS and what's real. How do you take that and, curate it, yourself and say, okay, this is something that I'm going to publish, or this is something that I can run with, or no, this is BS. Okay, this is a guy that maybe has an axe to grind. How do you curate, between sources and what's a good source, what's a bad source, what's something that you're going to put out there and because ultimately you're staking your name behind that as well. You're putting that out there.
And I have to do it on some level, not just with my own information that I get, but also with with reporters. I'm not going to name names, but there are certain, quote unquote reporters that we do not aggregate. You can go look at the stories on Silver Screen and Roll and probably take a guess at who we don't aggregate. But there are certain people that I'm just I do not think that this person is a reliable source of information on the Lakers or the NBA or whatever it may be. And so we have a list of stuff like that. And so that's one way that we deal with it. I think that one other thing that, the mindset that I try to take is I'm not going to beat Woj to stories on things like that. I'm just not that source. And I don't think that that's shocking to anyone that has followed my work or whatever. I'm not Woj, but sometimes I get information that, it's you don't really have it well enough that you feel like you can put it out there. You don't feel, whether it's the person that told you or whether it's that it's coming secondhand. Sometimes you'll hear something, but it's this person heard it from someone else. And so it's do I really want to put that out there and give it the time of day? Probably not. With stuff like that, I try to use it to inform my analysis. Okay, if I'm hearing something about, I don't know, about the Anthony Davis trade saga, but it's from someone who's second or third hand. I'm not necessarily I'm not going to put that out there and be quote, a source just told me that the Lakers offered this package for Anthony Davis. No, that's not what I'm going to do. Or I'm going to try and use that to determine what we aggregate, on Silver Screen and Roll, and I'm going to try and use that to determine how I analyze a situation. So I may not be putting a league source told me da 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 da.
Right.
But sometimes if I write my opinion, it's based on talking to people and feeling confident that this is probably what's going on. If that makes sense. I'm not necessarily putting it out there as fact because I don't know it well enough to know that it's fact, but I'll put it out there as I think this is probably pretty close to fact. This is my best read on the situation. So sometimes, even if I'm not sourcing it, it's informed speculation.
Right. And I got to imagine that's kind of...
Sometimes it's just my speculation. So, I don't want people to start taking everything that I say as speculation as, it's something that I heard third hand. It's just that's the best way that I found to deal with that.
Right. And I got to imagine that's got to be the hardest part of your job, right? Or one of the hardest parts of your job is just dealing with that because, at the end of the day, you have to trust the information that you're getting. And
exactly. And you want people to, more importantly, I want people to trust me. So
right,
if I'm
exactly.
not sure about something, I don't want to put it out there because I don't want you to come back and, at best just hit me with the old takes exposed, but at worst, just think that I'm not a trustworthy source of information. So if I'm putting something out there, it's because I feel like it's pretty ironclad generally.
Well, let's transition over to the Lakers. Where did this season go wrong? In just you covering the team. Obviously, I'm just a fan. I'm watching them game by game. You have a little bit more, insular access to them and see what happened on a game to game basis. Where did this season go wrong? Where did everything flip? If you were doing a pie chart, would most of the blame go to Luke Walton? Would most of the blame go to the whole Anthony Davis saga? Would it go to the injuries? I mean, where did this season just come apart for you in your estimation?
Where do I start?
I know, loaded question.
I think so. If you want, like, actually, our breakdown of like the causal pie, I actually like on the Lake Show, the Silver Screen and Roll podcast that Anthony Irwin and I do. Last Monday we broke down where we feel like the blame should probably be apportioned. So I'm not going to repeat all of that here.
Right.
But I will say, like, I think that it started in the summer, honestly, with the roster that they put together around LeBron. I think that they tried to. I was willing to listen to the argument that, like, okay, we're going to zig where everyone else is zagging. This, like, LeBron plus shooters hasn't been good enough to beat the Warriors, so we're going to try the playmaking thing. Like, I was like, okay, like, the person who, like, I could put my tinfoil hat on and think maybe this will work. Like, maybe they'll find something. But I think so much of that was dependent on LeBron being willing to play off the ball more than he ever has and play more center than he ever has. And we haven't really seen that, whether it's through injury, whether it's through stubbornness, whether it's through whatever. Like, there have been a lot of contextual factors into why we haven't seen that. And so I think that's if you want to look at patient zero, it's the off season. But I do think that the coaching has at times not been great. I don't think that Luke Walton is blameless. As much as I like him and appreciate him personally, I think that he's very giving with his time to the media, and he really does try to actually give honest answers and assessments of what he thinks. And so I appreciate people that are honest. I do think that there have been games like that game against the Bucks last week.
Yes,
I felt like he
absolutely.
lost in that game.
Yeah.
Just watching the rotations and the way that things went. But on some level, like, even if let's say, okay, let's go back in time and the Lakers put together a roster with more shooting around LeBron and the rest of these guys. So they got more shooters. And then let's say, like, Luke Walton kind of figures out the correct rotations a little bit better. Like, let's say they got rid of Luke Walton and they hired whatever coach you think would have done a great job. Like, you, the listener, whatever above average to great coach you think would have done a better job. Even if all of those things had happened, LeBron missing 18 games with a groin injury, Lonzo Ball's injury, ankle injury, and the defense cratering after that, Kyle Kuzma missing time, Brandon Ingram now missing a bunch of time and missing time at various points this season. And, like, just you go up and down the list of, like, how many injuries and how many significant injuries to their significant players this team has dealt with. And I still think that they may not have made the playoffs, even if everything, like, the offseason and the coaching had went right. So, like, I was saying this on Twitter today. I think it would be a mistake for the organization to point to bad luck and be like, well, we did everything fine, but it just didn't work out. And, like, use this as a way to just not really adjust their approach to building this roster moving forward. Like, that would be a mistake. But it's also a mistake for us to, like, and it's borderline dishonest for us to not contextualize that, like, okay, this team had horrendous injury luck and probably, like, if all this stuff would have happened and even if X, Y, and Z other things had went right, this team still may not have made the playoffs just because, like, they're 6.5 games out right now. The shooters, whatever, like, where does that get them? Does that get them within 2.5 games of playoff contention? Okay, even still, with this current roster they have right now, are you still betting on them to make the playoffs? I don't know that I would be at this point with how many guys are down and how, injury depleted this team was. So again, I think the front office deserves blame for how they handled the trade deadline, for how they built the roster. I think LeBron James deserves blame at times for, not really playing up to the level that we know that he can hit, although I think he has been at times hampered by injury. I also think that the way that the AD trade saga went down affected probably his stature in the locker room a little bit. That would be my guess. Again, that's not sourced. That's just my guess.
No, I get it.
And I think that, the only people that almost come out of this clean are the young Lakers, because I think that they stepped up as well as you could realistically expect second and third year players to do. And I think it's been the veterans that have been the problem. And, like, it's not necessarily like, I'm not going to be the hot take guy that's going to be like, they gave up, they didn't try. I think that the Lakers just didn't build necessarily the best supporting cast. And I think that the coaching deserves some, like, criticism as well. But I just think, to me, like, at this point, it's like injuries are almost the biggest thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would say the injuries are the biggest thing, but and again, I'm a fan. I'm not covering the team on a day-to-day basis, but I really believe that Anthony Davis saga really hurt the team. There's just something about it, just never seemed like they recovered after that.
anytime that you have, like, let's look back at how the whole thing started. LeBron gave willfully on the record comments about it would be great to play with Anthony Davis right before, like, in the lead up to a nationally televised on ESPN Lakers Pelicans game, where, you know, like, he told an ESPN reporter this would happen, and then the Lakers Pelicans game turned into, commentary wise, like, okay, what about all these trade rumors, essentially? And then all of a sudden, and then you have Davis demanding a trade directly through his agent, and the rare step of going on the record. And you just have all these connections here that, like, these guys can tell that at the very least, LeBron isn't fighting super hard to keep them on the team.
Exactly.
You know, like, and like, you can say, okay, they're still professionals. They need to go do their job. Of course, the Lakers and LeBron would want to trade all these guys for Anthony Davis. Like, sure. But at the same time, like, if you know, I was working for, if you or I were working for a company and we found out that our employer was chasing our replacement while we were under contract.
Exactly.
And they were telling us, no, be a professional though. Keep writing and doing your job. Like, on some level, you're going to be like, okay, but no, F you. If you're going to get rid of me anyway, why am I going to try? You know, and I think that we saw some of that from the veterans, you know, to some degree the kids, although I think that they've remained more bought in on defense and more productive throughout this than anyone. I just think that I think the trade deadline definitely did damage to this team.
Yeah, and I always get annoyed, and I've done the show, and I talk to people offline and on Twitter, and, you know, that's the first thing they say. Well, you know, they're supposed to be professionals and deal with that, and it's not that easy. I mean, you know, like you say, this idea.
Like, you can say that, sure, like, that's easy to say, and that's easy for them to say that they have to go out and do that. But on some level, you're human. Like, you're going to see all this stuff and be like, okay, well, they don't really want me, and different guys are going to approach that different ways.
Exactly, and it's not like these are young guys that are just bench warmers that haven't had an opportunity to play. In a lot of sense, you know, Brandon Ingram's had some success. Kyle Kuzma, look at Kyle Kuzma. I can see, you know, if I could put myself in Kyle Kuzma's head for a second, you know, I'm a guy that was a 27th pick. You know, any other year I win Rookie of the Year. I've proven that I can play, I can ball. And the second year, you know, the off season, we were sold as, you know, we're part of the core of this team going into the future. You know, we're going to be the missing pieces to the puzzle. And then here we are in January, and you're trying to offship us for Anthony Davis, who we understand. Everybody would understand that,
yeah,
you know,
like, if you were to inject these guys with truth serum, and they would say, yeah, we get it.
Absolutely.
Like, you know,
yeah.
But at the same time, like, how does that allow you to buy in?
Exactly.
I don't think it's an accident that we saw the defense, and this is not just the young guys, this is the veterans too, that were all in those trade rumors as well, except for basically JaVale McGee and Tyson Chandler, who got very, very injured and hurt at the same time. And so you just had all this stuff hit at once. I just don't know that it was possible for the team to survive that. Again, I don't think that absolves the roster construction or the coaching. I just think that, you know, this starts and ends with injuries ultimately.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the injuries definitely had if you had to kind of rank it 1A, I would say the injuries definitely, and then I would probably say 1A would be the Anthony Davis saga. Just a little bit on the Anthony Davis saga, like, and I know it's hard because, you know, obviously you're not Magic Johnson, but put yourself in the Magic Johnson shoes for a second. Like, how would you have handled that situation better? I mean, I think the thing that's most disappointing for me is that Magic's a guy, he's been around for a long time. Obviously, he's a legend. He's a player. He knows how these things are. He knows the games that GMs and executives play. For Magic and Rob Pelinka to be played the way that they were, that's the part that really kind of gives me pause and concern as a Laker fan, because it's like, did you guys not see this coming? Like, I mean, you guys can't be this naive, this self-involved that you didn't see this would be an aspect of this.
Yeah, again, I don't know all the details of everything,
right,
and how it all went down exactly behind the scenes, but, like, we can paint in broad strokes based on what we do know. And I think that you're seeing a little bit of being an inexperienced executive. You're having two guys that have never served in their current roles, and very much believing in, like, the Lakers' exceptionalism mantra, essentially. And the way that they approached the trade deadlines, that kind of showed that. Like, they, you know, you can complain that, like, okay, other teams are leaking our trade offers and this is destroying our locker room and da-da-da-da. Like, okay, but if they're negotiating in that bad of faith and you feel like they didn't negotiate in good faith, all that stuff, like, stop throwing more trade rumors at them.
Exactly.
For them to leave,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, if every single time you're telling them about some offer and it's going, and, like, I don't ultimately know who leaked each one of these trade offers, but, like, if if your complaint, so like if you're going to complain, like, okay, it was them, they were leaking all of our trade offers, this is all them, we weren't doing it. Like at some point, you like if that's your excuse, then there's still criticism of you, because you should have said at some point, hey, stop leaking our trade offers, or we're going to step away. And like again, that's if you believe this company anonymously reported source line or whatever that like they weren't the ones leaking about this. I don't believe that, but if you do believe that, even still, at some point you got to step away from the table then. Like if you think that they're weaponizing these leaks and these trade offers and like you're being so unfairly targeted in this stuff, like you got to realize then, okay, like they're not negotiating in good faith. There's nothing we can do. You can't keep throwing more players at them if that's what's really happening.
Right. I just felt like Magic and Rob just kind of played all along into Dell Demps and his game. And I was like, man, can smarten up, Magic, like understand that you're being played. And and like you said, I think we're so used to seeing Magic and have success at everything he does. And we forget that, he's an experienced executive. He's not done this on a basketball level. Yes, he was a player and he was a great player, obviously, but he hasn't done this at the executive level. But you would think that somebody in the room would say, you know what, hey, we're being played here. Like this is not going to work out the way we want to.
Yeah, I'm not sure that person is in the room or that Magic would listen to them. So interesting.
Yeah. Have you lost faith and confidence in Magic? As a guy that can put this team together, as a Laker fan, man, and I love Magic, but I mean, some of the trades, some of the moves have left a lot to be desired. I think I ranted for about 2 hours on the Zubac trade. I just did not understand that trade. That trade just. I will never understand that trade. Zuba's another guy that I really enjoyed covering and talking to, and so that one was a bummer for me personally. But also, like, I just from just the strictly basketball perspective, I did not understand that trade. And I don't think that the results since then have really borne out. No, absolutely not. That it was a good move. So this is not just hindsight 2020. You know what it feels like? It feels like that trade was made because I think Magic and Rob for the first time really were getting killed in the media and we're getting heat. And I think they felt like, and again, I don't know this, whatever. Yeah. Take it from me. But, here's the thing. I just kind of felt like they were taking heat for the media and I felt like they felt like let's just make a move. And that's the worst kind of trade that you can make. No, that trade screamed, we got to find shooters. Let's go to NBA.com and look at the forwards with the best 3-point shooting percentage. Oh my and then God. Give up everything for that. I just didn't understand it. No, couldn't. I don't know. Especially you're selling Zubac when he's starting to play well. Like I don't mind trading Zubac if he's a piece for Anthony Davis or if he's a piece for another star. But you're trading Zubac for Mike Muscala? Like what? It doesn't seem fair. It looks like Jerry West completely played Magic. Another executive that played Magic. Yeah, or Lawrence Frank or whoever. Yeah. Oh, God. We talked about, obviously, Luke and him having the lion's share of the blame here as well for how this season has played out. Why do you think there's been this kind of divide with the love for Luke? It just kind of seems like ever since Magic and Rob took over, and I get it, he wasn't their guy. They didn't hire him. But it just seems like even from the beginning last year, just kind of felt a buzz, just kind of felt that buzz that they just were never all in on Luke Walton. And it kind of showed and it carried over into this season. So why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that even from last year, in my opinion, there was just kind of this apprehension to be all in on Luke Walton? Well, I think on some level it's he is an easy person to scapegoat because he's the coach that they didn't hire, so they can say, okay, well, the problem wasn't us or our roster, it was this coach that didn't use them right. And so I think that's part of it. And I think part of it is like based on, and this is not me saying this is a bunch of reporters from various outlets have said things along these lines that like Magic does not see Luke Walton, like Luke Walton does not fit Magic's platonic ideal of a coach of like as this Pat Riley style screamer that's like constantly getting on guys, and like that's not Luke. That's not his personality. Like Luke does actually like yell at people more than you would think based on his media availabilities and whatever. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like the whole, I think that's just the biggest part of it is he just doesn't recognize, like he doesn't see Luke Walton as as his ideal, like he doesn't look like the type of coach that Magic Johnson wants to coach his team, or he doesn't act like it in some ways. And so I think that's almost the biggest thing. And then I think the scapegoating part of it as well. So
and
there's
also that Luke Walton has made a lot of. We should know that I'm not defending Luke has made a lot of mistakes this year, so I think that definitely plays into it as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Luke hasn't helped himself, and I've said it on the show countless times. It's getting hard if you're in the camp that defends Luke Walton and thinks he's getting scapegoated. It's kind of been hard to defend Luke the last couple of weeks.
He's being
scapegoated. Yes, we know that.
Completely blameless.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, no,
not,
absolutely.
This is not prime Phil Jackson like being fired because like the management doesn't like him or whatever. Like this is not like the Spurs firing Pop because he was mean to the owner or something like that. Like this is there's merit behind these criticisms as well.
And do you see any way that he's keeping his job? I mean, it's almost a foregone conclusion at this point, right?
No, I think he's gone like maybe the night the season ends or the day after. Like I do not think he's going to last.
So here's the interesting question. Who's the replacement? Cause that's the thing. You can sit there. We can talk about Luke Walton, another coach coming in. Who's the guy? Who's the candidate that I gotta be honest with you. I'm not excited about any of the guys that have been potentially mentioned. Jason Kidd, no, I'll pass. Tyronn Lue, I'll pass.
That's the one that I think it might be.
Oh God.
It's Kidd. But,
Jason Kidd.
I think Lue is a possibility. I think Lue has seemed to enjoy the not coaching lifestyle, and he dealt with a lot of, speaking of like the health issues that we've talked about, he dealt with a lot of those from the stress of coaching that team and all that stuff with the Cavs about a year ago. And so does he want to jump right back into the like LeBron contender grind? Like, I don't know. And I just, none of the names have blown me away either.
Who would be your ideal candidate? Who's the guy that you would want to see? Is there a hot assistant out there? Is there a coach maybe from another team that could possibly have some interest if the Lakers try to pluck him away? I mean, who's a guy that you would like to see maybe get a chance to coach this team?
I put on my conspiracy theory hat and went.
Conspiracy theories! I love conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
Go ahead, come on.
I went Spoelstra. When I was on George Sedano's show on ESPN, and we were talking about this exact topic, and I said I thought it could be Spoelstra because he has 1 year left on his deal after this. The Heat seem to kind of be going nowhere, and maybe he's the type of like Doc Rivers from a couple of years ago where the Clippers made a trade for him and compensate the Heat in some way, and maybe like Pat Riley's ready to do his guy solid and send him out that way or whatever on the way out. But Sedano pushed back pretty hard on that, saying like he said that he thinks that Spoelstra could be the guy that is like the successor to Riley, is like the coach / consigliere like for that team. And so like that's a valid point. So I don't know that one will happen. I think that if the Lakers could manage to do that, that would be an incredible hire and like easily the best head coaching hire they've made since hiring Phil Jackson. But I'm less confident that will happen. I think it's going to be one of these guys. I don't think it'll be Mark Jackson. I think Jason Kidd is my guess right now.
Oh God. I mean, and why Kidd? I mean, what exactly does Kidd bring to the table besides the fact that he's Jason Kidd? I
think that's a big part of it. I think he's Jason Kidd. I think he has a good relationship with LeBron. I think Magic can relate to him on the level of like, we are both Hall of Fame point guards. And I think Kidd does fit the type of fiery personality that they'd probably be looking for. So, I mean, again, I don't know that it'll be him. That would be my guess. There was like some speculation from Stephen A. Smith that it might be Doc Rivers or I think it was Stephen A. Smith that said that. There was like somebody speculating on the radio today that it might be Doc Rivers or whatever. I'm less confident in that given the way things are going with the Clippers.
Yeah.
But who knows?
No way Jerry West and that team lets Doc Rivers go because they know as soon as Doc Rivers becomes available, he's going to the Lakers. I mean, it's just, I don't think that's going to happen. But
yeah, I mean, I could see maybe them trade. I don't think they'll trade him either.
No,
like although that would be weird for Doc Rivers to have been traded twice as a coach in his career.
That would be weird, but I don't know. I can believe a lot of things. That one, the Spoelstra thing is interesting, because I do feel like
like I said, I don't think it'll happen anymore, but he would be an interesting target if maybe like he wasn't in line to succeed Riley or whatever, or he maybe for some other reason he wanted to be in LA or I don't know. Yeah.
Any other names that kind of stand out to you, maybe that are not getting as much attention? Someone else that you maybe like to see, maybe a hot assistant or anybody that you've kind of talked to just in your circle in the league?
I think David Blatt is. No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't. There's no one else that I've really heard much about or like and super high on. And again, I'm not super familiar with assistants around the league. And so, like, you know, like there are guys out there that they could go get. I just like, what about this organization and the way that they've behaved over the last number of years makes you think that they're going to go pluck an assistant off someone's bench? Like, they want a big name.
No, absolutely. And that's just the Lakers way. That's always been that. You know, they're not going to hire assistant, you know, what's his face to coach this team, especially with LeBron James.
That would not be my guess. No, unless there was like a guy with unforeseen, like, knows what it means to be a Laker ties out there.
Right. What about the roster construction? Obviously there's going to be some changes in the offseason. One would think and one would hope. You know, do you see these kids, you know, how do you see this all playing out? Is this a roster construction next year where it's going to be, you know, basically an AAU / all-star team for LeBron? Is this going to be more of the same? Is this going to be kind of the kids and a veterans mix with more shooters? Hopefully. I mean, how do you see this roster construction going?
I think they're going to go for they're going to try and sign a superstar for free first, and like in free agency. And then either if that doesn't work out, or even if it works out and they're able to like keep a little bit of money, like get that guy to take a little less than the max or something like that, then I think that you do see them go hard after Anthony Davis again, and then try to surround that with all of the kids available in the package. And then you see them surround those players with, you know, maybe some shooters this time. But I think it's going to be a top-heavy roster once again, would be my guess.
Of the kids that you're trading, and let's just play this out. Let's say that the Anthony Davis conversations pick up. Who ultimately do you see being included in that deal? Obviously, some package having to include Lonzo in it.
I think it's going to be all of them. Like,
really?
Unless they get the number one pick or something like that in the lottery, like, which they don't have a great shot at right now. But, you know, like, let's just say they do, then maybe you can take some people out of that package. But ultimately, if they were throwing it all on the table before the trade deadline, I think they're going to continue to negotiate against themselves this summer.
And doesn't it feel like you almost have to try to trade one of them now at this point because of everything that went down in the trade deadline and the bruised egos in the locker room? Doesn't it almost feel like you almost have to try to make a trade?
I think on some level, yes, but also at the same time, like they might be able, like, a summer and some talks and whatever. Like, we've seen teams more fractured than this reconcile. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, even if they aren't ever best friends again or whatever, or they aren't calling LeBron their big bro, you know, like, I don't know that you have to make a trade just for locker room reasons. I think all these guys are pretty good personalities in the locker room, and I think they'd be able to get over it and get past it.
How has it been covering the young guys, especially Lonzo? Because I kind of feel like Lonzo's been beaten up a lot, and a lot of it has to do with LeVar and the crazy comments that he's made over the years. How has it been covering Lonzo specifically? Because that's an interesting one, because I kind of feel like the kid is taking unfair criticism and beatings in his career so far for things that he hasn't even said himself. So how is he?
I absolutely believe that. Lonzo has been really professional with the media. He has one of the most incredible abilities I've ever seen to listen to a question and give you just as much of an answer as your question requires. It's like he like reads questions like they're a defense. It's kind of incredible. And like pumps out the quote immediately. Like he doesn't like really think too much about it. He just answers your exact question and move in as little time as possible and moves on. And it's like it was crazy because last year when he would do media availabilities more because he wasn't hurt and whatever, like at the beginning of the year, mm-hmm. we would go through and like we talked to all these guys and like, you know, various guys, like Luke would do a 10-minute post-game availability, like other guys would do 5, 6, whatever. Lonzo would be done 2, no matter how many questions you had, because he's just like hyper efficient at answering questions. So, and I think that he's a guy, like it's not that he's being dismissive. He will like actually answer your question and whatever. It's just, it's kind of incredible how quickly he discerns exactly what you want to know about and tells you in as little words as possible.
And how has it been covering LeBron? I mean, I got to imagine that's something that's a little bit new to you, obviously, because he's new to the team, but just kind of covering a guy of that stature and everything that surrounds LeBron. How has it been covering LeBron James?
It's been kind of insane because of all of the extra attention that he brings, and like his locker room scrums like extend almost from his locker to almost like halfway through the locker room. And like sometimes there have been multiple games this year I haven't been able to hear a word he's saying during his like post game thing, and I have to listen back to someone else's recording afterwards because it's like so competitive to get in there and get close. And So it's been kind of crazy. I think he's been pretty good with the media so far. I think the one thing that's new is like having to read every quote for some kind of subtext, because like that's how he communicates.
Interesting. I struggle with this because I kind of want to see the young kids develop, and I kind of want to see we've been through this rebuild now for 5 years, and I want to see some receipt from that. And I feel like you trading these young guys off, I mean, it kind of undermines the 5 years of building. And that's the danger. And I think when you get into the LeBron James game, where it becomes now, instead of building a team and building a roster that's going to compete for the next 5-6 years, you're in this championship chasing game where everything becomes about chasing championships for LeBron and adding star player here and star player there. I don't know how ideal that is for the long-term health of this organization. I mean, okay, you got LeBron for another 3 years, but LeBron's aging. I mean, I think this is the first year where he's started to show at least, how much of that is just the injury, but
he might not make first team all NBA, which is crazy.
Yeah. When you think about it, but I think anybody that's looking at this objectively, I think, would say, LeBron's shown some signs of slowing down. I mean, obviously we've all seen the videos of the defense effort and all that, but, how ideal do you think this is going forward? Like, whether it happens or doesn't, and it's more speculation now, obviously, but how ideal do you think this is for the Lakers to be in this game of trying to build a championship team around LeBron?
I mean, I think that there are pluses and minuses to it. The plus is that you're in championship contention,
right?
At least theoretically. They obviously haven't been this year. I think the one drawback to that, and you're seeing some of this now, is when it doesn't go right and when things aren't going well, LeBron hasn't built up the fan equity with this fan base for people to like you saw the other night when he passed Jordan. It was kind of an awkward situation and crowd, and you're just seeing in how quickly Lakers fans were to turn on him. It's because he hasn't been here, and then all of a sudden he comes here, and all of a sudden all these guys that you've been telling them for the past couple years, true or not, that are the future, you're trying to move them on to get him some more help. And so I think that you have seen some people, because fandom is not rational. LeBron and Anthony Davis are better than LeBron and the kids, but it's about asset management. It's about how these guys were sold, and then all of a sudden you're treating them like they're nothing, and you're just trying to shove them out the door for another guy. I just think that it's it's not ideal. If they don't win, it's going to lead to a lot of hurt feelings and a lot of people upset in the fan base, because they were invested in these rebuilds and watching these guys grow, and then all of a sudden you're telling me that they aren't going to get to be here for this rebuild that you said was coming, and you're going to take a shot on building around an aging star. When it doesn't work, this is the type of climate that you get. And if it had worked, then people would have rallied behind LeBron and have made him a beloved Laker and all that stuff. But that's the chance that you're taking when bringing in a guy this late career that only has a couple good years left.
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting where the Lakers go, not just this summer, but going forward in the next 3 years. Harrison, thank you for being my guest this week. Before you go, man, go ahead and plug all your social media, where people can find you, where you can read your stuff, where they can listen to your show. Go ahead and plug everything, man.
So you can listen to my podcast on iTunes and pretty much anywhere else podcasts are downloadable from. Just search Silver Screen and Roll Podcast, and we have our own podcast feed with various hosts on the different days. I'm really proud of the team that we've been able to put together. I think it's been great. SilverScreenandRoll.com is the website that I run, and @HMFaigen is my Twitter handle. That's @HMFAIGEN, and so that's where you can find most of my work. I'm constantly tweeting stories that I am myself or my writers are writing, trying to give insights on this team, and occasionally pictures of my cat.
Well, I don't know if I speak for every Laker fan, but I know I speak for this Laker fan. We really thank you and appreciate all the work that you put in, man, and keep up the good work and keep up the good coverage. And we hope to have you on the show again, man.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. All right, my thanks again to Harrison for joining me this week on the podcast. As always, follow him on Twitter at HMFagan. Make sure you check out Silver Screen and Roll. It's a really, really dope site, especially if you're a Laker fan. It's a lot of great content, a lot of great writers, a lot of great stories. It's very, very dope. They put out quality work over there, man. So check him out. Also check out his podcast, Laker Nation. It's a dope show. It's available anywhere where you can find podcasts. Make sure you check that out as well. Okay, I'm done. My voice is starting to give out on me. I'm starting to cough a little bit and it's starting to get a little grainy and strainy. I don't know if I'm just getting sick again or what, but I'm tired of podcasting. 2 shows in 1 weekend is enough for me, so I'm done. But as always, man, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing to the show. Without you guys, there is no podcast. So from the bottom of my heart, I really, really appreciate it. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at AGS Pod, on Instagram, AGS Podcast, on Facebook, Any Given Sunday. Follow me on Twitter at The Manuel Brown, on Instagram at The Manuel Brown, and of course on Facebook, Manuel Brown, and Snapchat and MannyBro15. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Don't forget to drop those iTunes reviews. We really, really, really need those iTunes reviews. It's important for the show. It's important for us to grow and reach new listeners that haven't had an opportunity to encounter us before. It's very important. So just drop those reviews, man. It's really important. But I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm starting to stammer now, so I'm getting up out of here. But I hope you guys have a happy, safe, blessed rest of your week, and check us out next week with another episode of the podcast. Peace. Serious sound.